so much, Matt. And Nico, I'll forgive you for being Dutch. No. In seriousness, with an intro like that, I feel like I need Van Halen Panama to like just start cranking right now as I take the stage. Morning to everyone, those of you here in the room, and it sounds like we have a couple thousand online. And this really is the most distinguished group of intelligence professionals, analysts, and security practitioners from across the whole spectrum of the OSINT ecosystem. So I really want to thank SANS Institute. I want to thank you, Matt, and Nico for inviting me. And really, one of the things Matt mentioned on LinkedIn this morning, first a little real-time analysis, was that it's not just Matt, it's Matt and team. And that's very much how we function at Flashpoint. So if I say anything useful, that's team. If I screw anything up or I say something that just made you uncomfortable, that's on me. So I'm going to own any of the defects in what I talked to you about. And I've got some butterflies dancing. In many ways, I feel like I'm giving the kickoff speech at a Star Trek convention. Literally everyone here is already an expert, or they're going to finish this certification and be an expert by the end of the week. So just briefly, my name is Andrew Borene. I'm the Executive Director for Global Security at Flashpoint. Currently, Flashpoint's the largest privately owned provider of threat intelligence in the world. And throughout my own career, I've worked across the intelligence community in the United States, the private sector, and in national security, serving in government roles, the Office of Director of National Intelligence and the Pentagon, as well as leading some international business growth efforts for a couple of Fortune 500 companies. I've spent my entire career focused on things like counterterrorism, counterintelligence, and strategic security. And today, I want to talk about one of the most critical forces shaping all of those areas. And it's what you all do, open source intelligence, or OSINT. So this is not going to be just another intelligence discipline. OSINT has become the key to understanding and navigating a world where cyber, physical, and geopolitical threats are converging like we have never seen before. We no longer live in a world where conflicts are confined to borders or to battlefields in Ukraine or in the Gaza Strip or in the Middle East. This really is a hybrid conflict. And when I talk about hybrid, I mean it not only in the sense of the digital physical convergence, I mean hybrid in the convergence of state power and non-state actors, proxies, things like the Prigozhin Group, where OSINTers from places like Bellingcat and the Royal United Services Institute did some really amazing work uncovering using publicly available enclosed information collection to expose some really nefarious activity. We live in this world now where cyber attacks can take down entire industries within hours. Disinformation can shift public opinion and destabilize entire societies within weeks. One single corporate breach can expose millions of identities, critical secrets, or even impact elections, and we've already seen it. And OSINT, and when I say OSINT, what I mean is the big bundle of publicly available information, commercially available information, and direct observation, has become one of the most powerful tools for understanding, anticipating, and responding to these types of threats in real time. Just look at Ukraine. 3 years ago, this very day, Russia invaded Ukraine. Prior to that invasion, before the first drone was launched, before the first missile or rocket attacked a civilian area in Ukraine, open source intelligence tracked troop movements. When disinformation flooded social media, OSINTers debunked it in real time. And when what very much appear to have been some serious war crimes were committed, OSINT exposed them in real time and is creating a legacy of evidence that may be usable in future international prosecution. Classified intelligence really isn't enough anymore. When we talk about kind of the highest end of OSINT as a pure government function supporting classified intelligence, the intelligence community is already seeing that it has to adapt. And we've seen that through things like policies at CIA and the Office of Director of National Intelligence embracing commercially available information. We also see it on the Hill. The House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence has created a new subcommittee on this discipline. Threats do not respect traditional boundaries, and neither can allied intelligence capabilities. So that's really what this session is going to be about. I'm going to talk about how OSINT bridges some gaps, how it's reshaping decision-making in both governments and multinational private sector and business, and frankly, why I believe those of us in this room and online need to work together to professionalize it as a discipline. We need to work together to ensure integrity, reliability, and perhaps most importantly, ethical collection and use. So by the end of today's talk, I hope you have a little bit of a deeper understanding of who some of today's adversaries are in this hybrid Cold War I'm going to talk about, how OSINT can bridge some of the gaps between cyber, geopolitics, counterterrorism, and corporate security, and the future. In many ways, we can see it in real time that the future is now. I'll talk briefly about how AI, deepfakes, and automation are changing this game, and why we have to raise the bar for tradecraft through things like SANS certifications and training across sectors. So let's dive in. We live in an era now where the lines between cyber, physical, and geopolitical are not just blurred. It really has converged into a single hybrid threat landscape. Gone are the days when intelligence disciplines could operate in silos. So for those of you in this room and many of the folks in the private sector, it used to be that cybersecurity was for the IT nerds and the SOC, when foreign policy issues were for diplomats and wonks at some think tank, when the knuckle draggers with badges and guns and physical security seldom spoke to those IT nerds or wonks. Those days are gone. We see unified threat intelligence, and we see OSINT as the component bringing it all together, inherently a fusion activity. Along that line that everything is connected, we see geopolitical conflicts fought in cyberspace. Russia's invasion of Ukraine was not just military aggression. Many of you in this room probably worked on projects that exposed cyber attacks on the Ukrainian power grid, financial institutions, and government agencies. We see cyber criminals and state actors working together. One of the pronounced examples of that I can think of is last summer when Russia did a prisoner exchange. In the old Cold War, that would have been spies, diplomats, generals. Who did a couple of those thieves? Russia repatriated not state-aligned convicts of cybercrime. I think that's a signal. They're not only a safe haven, but they will repatriate criminals to the Russian Federation. Disinformation is not just propaganda, gray literature, black literature, leaflet drops. It's become a weapon used by the Chinese Communist Party and Russian intelligence services and Iran to use AI-generated deepfakes, fake social media accounts, and manipulated media to sway public opinion and destabilize democracies outside their own territorial borders. In short, these adversaries aren't choosing one method of attack. They use them all interchangeably and in a hybrid fashion. So OSINT's never been more critical. It really is the only intelligence discipline that can track and analyze these threats in real time as they occur in the digital environment. So I want to talk you through a couple of key players shaping the landscape: state-sponsored adversaries and some non-state actors that we see leveraging OSINT cyber capabilities and attacking with hybrid warfare or tactics. So let's start with the state sponsors. Nation states that use intelligence, cyber operations, and influence campaigns as part of their actual strategic foreign policy. At Flashpoint, the team often refers to these as rogue cyber actors. First, Russia, the agents of chaos. The war in Ukraine really is the most glaring example of how OSINT is shaping modern conflict. I mentioned tracking troop movements and countering disinformation, but OSINT has also been a critical asset because Russia uses cyber operations, extraterritorial sabotage. There have been fires, there have been harassment, there have been killings in Bulgaria, where ammunition is manufactured to support Ukrainian forces. Some of you may be familiar that there was a Russian government-backed assassination plot on the CEO of Germany's Rheinmetall defense contractor. There are increasingly suspicious fires and activities happening throughout the defense industrial base in Europe. Here in America, we don't think about that too often, but rest assured, I meet with many of our security partners, and they are thinking about this, and they are concerned. And so free world OSINTers can actually help uncover evidence that might lead to indicators of who's behind some of that suspicious fire or sabotage, potential sabotage. China. Unlike Russia, China plays the long game. They're focused on economic espionage, AI-driven intelligence, and supply chain infiltration. I think many of you are familiar with the DeepSeek controversy that popped up last week where the Chinese government, and under current Chinese law, every single Chinese company headquartered in China is compelled to share its information with the organs of the Chinese Communist state. That's actually not always been the case. 20 years ago, that was not a law on the books. So Ministry of State Security, People's Liberation Army gets access to all of that data. It's been difficult, I think, for many of us to communicate why that's a risk to decision makers, whether they're on the Hill or in the media or within our companies. But where does the data live is a very important question, and people in this room understand it probably better than most. Iran and North Korea are both using cyber operations as economic warfare, targeting financial institutions and critical infrastructure. Recently, many of you probably saw the North Korean IT workers posing as freelancers, trying to seek contracts on American companies. Some people in our industry have indicated it's possible Lazarus Group, a North Korean DPRK affiliated group, may have just stolen $1.5 billion from Bybit. Wow, $1.5 billion. So if you're a sanctioned regime and you have no access to international trade, you may be leveraging some of these tools to steal money to fund your government. One of the ones that stands out to me also is Albania. Tiny little Albania. Beautiful. They call themselves Shqiperia is how they say their name in Albania. But the Albanians, small as they are, were sheltering some dissidents from Iran. And what did Iran do? Wipers. They wiped data off government and commercial systems in Albania, crippling a very small allied power. That's an extraterritorial use of this hybrid set of tools that I've been talking about. Beyond governments, we also see an alarming rise in hybrid threats from non-state actors. These are the groups that operate outside of traditional state control. These are not units of the GRU. They're not units of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. But they are a threat, and we have to merge that consideration of state power and proxy actors or cyber criminal groups. So we have ransomware as a service. I think of this more as extortion. Increasingly, it's becoming less about the ransomware and more about the extortion and just being a pirate. They operate like businesses. Groups like Lockbit, Elf-V Black Cat sell ransomware to affiliates, creating a farm system, allowing even low-level hackers to launch attacks that have exceedingly high impact. Info stealers are another key component in that ransomware. It's not just about locking down the data, it's about stealing it. We also see terrorist organizations using what I think of as more of a terror innovation hub mindset. As opposed to recruiting, training, and deploying cells, we see things like the New Year's Day attack in New Orleans or the Munich attack, where they inspire a lone wolf actor through their activities. Hacktivists and ideological groups that are not aligned with our view of freedom and safety. Pro-Russian groups like Killnet, pro-Hamas cyber collectives, and anarchist groups are launching coordinated cyber attacks that target government agencies, corporations, and critical infrastructure alike. These actors all thrive on visibility because of a political agenda, using public platforms to coordinate in many cases, which makes OSINT a key component in combating that threat. What's critical to understand for all of us when we talk to decision makers is that there is an overlap between these actors. Criminal organizations must launder money for state-backed cyber campaigns in many cases. Hacktivists amplify disinformation on behalf of foreign governments. And ransomware groups often seek to disrupt an entire economy while they benefit some of these hostile nations. And the only way to effectively counter them is through intelligence that crosses all of the disciplines, providing visibility to everything from cyber criminal marketplaces, blockchain illumination, and dark web forums to disinformation campaigns, and even battlefield intelligence. So now that I've kind of talked a little bit about the key state adversaries, I want to talk about how OSINTers actually make sense of some of the data in this soup of publicly available, commercially available, and observation. And OSINT's a bridge between intelligence disciplines. On the government side, and forgive me for sounding a little bit professorial, I'm a lawyer and a professor, so it happens. But signals intelligence, that's the National Security Agency type bailiwick, often is focused on intercepting communications and network traffic. Humant or human intelligence is what you think of at the CIA, where they recruit spies, the oldest of the intelligence disciplines. GeoInt or geospatial intelligence analyzes satellite imagery and terrain data through the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, or NGA, as the functional manager for that. And then there's another kind of subset that's highly specific and technical, MASINT, measurement and signatures intelligence, which frequently is used to track WMD through things like emissions, radiological profiles, detecting things like many years ago there was a Pakistan nuclear test. When that happened, helped provide tipping and queuing for the other INTs. But OSINT is different because it can help provide a complete picture in its own right of some of these threats. It also provides transparency in intelligence analysis and operations. How important is that in today's world where the American public or allied publics often see the outcomes of intelligence activity? And it's not that the secrets aren't important, because the questions asked need to be secret for those governments. Just as proprietary information, when Coca-Cola wants to protect the secret formula, that also is rightfully proprietary. But transparency and the ability to show the work, if asked, is absolutely vital for governments today. It also provides actionable intelligence at scale. So shareability is really critical when we talk about allied intelligence operations. It's often difficult if someone gets a piece of intelligence that's highly classified signals intelligence, not shareable with any other country. But say it indicates a really frightening terrorist plot or the movement of WMD. They have to go through a very complicated process to get that declassified. If, on the other hand, there is a shareable OSINT report that validates that, that OSINT report can be much more readily shareable across, back to the earlier slide, I mentioned the Five Eyes, the English-speaking union. It can be shared much faster than declassification. It can be shared across NATO, 32 member states. NATO and the European Union has no inherent military or intelligence authorities of its own. So all of the European individual states have their own authorities. So OSINT might originate from a think tank or an NGO or like a company like us or some of the others that are out here in the sponsorship area. And it will actually change a decision for one of our allies because it was more readily shareable. And then lastly, in the Pacific, there's not a NATO of the Pacific, an NPTO or a PTO. There is, however, the quadrilateral security dialogue, where we see some of our closest allies, Australia, Japan, India, working with the United States. So sharing information with that quadrilateral security alliance and other allied governments is going to help us combat some of this communist Chinese concern that we all need to have as Americans. I'll talk briefly then about this example here. This is an example from some Flashpoint analysts that really demonstrates why classified intelligence is not enough in and of its own right. In this case, some OSINTers were tracking a person of interest affiliated with a Russian mercenary support group. No secret, that's the Prigozhin network, formerly Wagner. And using optical character recognition, they captured a partial license plate. I believe it was actually in a rearview mirror backwards. So a really smart analyst flipped the image, did a search across the holdings of all the social media that was proprietary, commercially available information, no longer publicly available. And they found some stickers on the car. They found that license plate. They found some people through image research. And they provided intelligence to national security customers. And you can see that it actually disrupted the movement of some arms and some material support to the Prigozhin network seeking to harm civilians in Ukraine. And that was a big win. And that's the type of work everybody that's here in the room and everybody who's online is getting trained up to be part of. I want to talk briefly about OSINT as the intelligence bridge. The US government talks a lot about OSINT as the INT of first resort. And that's true, and it has been for a long time. I would contend that OSINT is not only the INT of first resort, it is a foundational intelligence for all of those other siloed disciplines, right? It is inherently fusion-based. So I think it's important. Right now, you look at it, CIA and the Office of Director of National Intelligence identified a functional manager for OSINT, the director of the Central Intelligence Agency. That's good. We talked about a little bit about that Hill Committee being formed. And that's a good start. They've got a great commercially available information policy. And a big challenge, though, is when I meet with foreign partner governments, they're still operating that it is only publicly available information. And I think this is where I'm just going to float some ideas as terms of art about how we think about OSINT as a community and how it has these varying definitions so that we can more effectively collaborate. And along those lines, not all OSINT is created equal. Right now, the definition of OSINT is in a gray space. In about 2002, 2003, there were a lot of law review articles published that talked about how counterterrorism and terrorism had hundreds of definitions across US law and international law. OSINT, not defined by law, but even as we think about it as a concept, right, has all of these different notions. Is it just publicly available? Is it publicly available and commercially available? Is it observation? Is it the use of an analyst collector in a hybrid role, taking the things that they see, living in the loop, using managed attribution to get deeper and deeper upstream against the threat? And so to unlock all of the potential for what we can do, I'd argue that we need to start thinking about how we professionalize. I want to call out my friend David Cook because he had this great comment. We were in an Atlantic Council meeting on counterterrorism a few weeks ago. And I think Dave's here, so if you see him, go find him. But he said we need to move from public-private partnerships to private-public partnerships. And the way I see it is no one's coming to save us. It's up to us. We can organize across these NGO, private sector, threat intelligence firms, training up hobbyists, right? And we can start setting some standards, and I think it's really important. The lawyer in me says, I'm a member of Bar Association. It has ethics that I must adhere to, right? And SANS Institute is such a great platform to help build a lot of that work. And so what separates kind of professional OSINT from amateur efforts? I think three key components: tradecraft and methodology. Professionals are following structured intelligence processes, structured analytic techniques. They use vetted sources, they validate and verify the information, and they ensure their findings are accurate and repeatable. Verification and analysis. They don't just collect. Cross-checking with multiple sources to avoid spreading misinformation. And to me, most importantly, ethics and compliance. A true OSINT professional is someone who understands the ethical considerations of OSINT collection. Inadvertently doxing an innocent person is unethical. So we need to be thinking about those types of aspects on the collection side. And we also need to think about things that might compromise the integrity or operational security of those whom we seek to help through doing our craft. And because of those reasons, the stakes are just too high for us not to start professionalizing. On the national security front, intelligence failure could cost lives. I have some friends that used to refer to it as the Fingernail Preservation Society. Can cost limbs, can cost imprisonment, right? In cybersecurity, an inaccurate attribution or an inaccurate report on the viability of an exploit could actually lead to misaligned defense strategies. There's only so much time in the day for a SOC to run patches. If they do the wrong one because we gave bad information, that could be very costly. And in law enforcement, or even when we talked about war crimes documentation, poor practices not only misinterpret data, but they could compromise an entire investigation based on evidentiary guidelines violations. So to truly elevate OSINT, we need to move from a fragmented set of practices to more of an established profession. One with standards, certifications, some form of accountability, and collective ethics. And I'm not going to pretend I have the answer of what all of those look like. That's a journey that we can take together. But we do not need to wait for the government. Like my friend David Cook said, those of us in the private sector, those volunteers, we can step up and start doing this work ourselves. So this is not meant to be prescriptive, just like my definition of professional OSINT was not meant to be prescriptive. It's a term of art. But kind of thinking about an OSINT maturity model. What do we think about, my dad is in his 70s. I imagine he thinks he's OSINTing, but he's doing Google or he's looking up something on Wikipedia or Gemini or ChatGPT, right? That's kind of the hobbyist level. Somebody bouncing around doing research. Do your own research, I've heard. They might be monitoring open source news, setting up news alerts, tracking social media discussions, not doing managed attribution. And that's one of those things where I want to talk about. This is not a game for amateurs, especially in the wake of Secretary Rubio announcing that Latin American cartels are foreign terrorist organizations. Rest assured, those cartels hurt people that they find as a threat to their operational security. And in the Fingernail Preservation Society, I would argue don't work on some of those types of cases until you have learned some very sophisticated managed attribution to protect yourself. That's kind of that number one down there, beginner level. Up at number two, I think kind of like practitioner level, I'd argue these are the individuals who've learned some serious tradecraft techniques. They understand verification, validation, and they've started applying OSINT to functional areas, whether it's in cybersecurity or law enforcement, or sometimes military national security use cases. They might work, and many of you do, in corporate intelligence. You work in government. You work perhaps supporting investigative journalism. You use structured methodologies to turn raw data or information into actual intelligence. And then as we move toward that professional grouping, and I think really all 3, 4, and 5 are more in this professional type bucket. These are the analysts that drive mission critical intelligence efforts. They follow professional standards, adhere to ethical and legal guidelines. They know what the ethical and legal guidelines are, and they apply advanced techniques. They can do things that are pretty high end, tracking cyber criminals in their dark web forums, or identifying really complex geopolitical disinformation campaigns with attribution and tracking the digital dust from the point of collection until its delivery. That's a level where we're thinking about formal training, certification, and an adherence to what the industry, what we decide might be best practices. And it's not theoretical, it's already happening. I mentioned SANS Institute. This is phenomenal. There's another group called the OSINT Foundation. OSINT Foundation, I love. Unfortunately, they're US persons only. So they're putting out amazing concepts and some shareable papers. But I think in many ways, the other allies in this hybrid conflict would benefit from a similar type movement. And maybe SANS Institute is a way to do that. Maybe there's some other mechanism. But there is a need for it. So it's not just about credibility, it's about effectiveness. How can we be effective OSINTers? Because the better we are at this, the more we can do to protect national security, save corporate losses, and protect public safety. And really protecting public safety, I think, is perhaps the most important thing that this group can do. I want to talk a little bit about real-world implications. When organizations, whether government or private sector, think about cybersecurity, they often think about defending the perimeter. How do we lock down? How do we get bigger firewalls, better firewalls, endpoint security, intrusion detection? A lot of times, and it's amazing to me after being in this field for about 15 years, there's not a whole lot of thought about what happens right, we say right of boom in counterterrorism, what happens right of breach? And the truth is now that when we get right of breach, that data doesn't stop its life when the initial compromise is discovered. It starts a second life on the dark web. Breach data now fuels further cybercrime, empowers access to insider threats, and creates real national security risks. Stolen credentials, and when we talk about stolen credentials, that is terrifying. That is better than a password username. That gets you right in there. We're talking things like cookies and session browser information. Financial records with details, and even we've seen sensitive government documents living in the dark web. They get actively traded for money on an illicit marketplace. It fuels further identity theft, fuels further ransomware, sharing best practices on vulnerabilities that someone's identified and outsourcing fraud. We're also seeing these nation states I talked about, these rogue cyber actors, using that type of data for further espionage, building dossiers, if you will, on key individuals, or perhaps people who are unwitting and don't feel they're key individuals, but might be tricked because they're somewhere in an access chain through social engineering. We see these criminal networks I've talked about using breach data to also build really complex profiles. So it's hybrid. You have formal services like the GRU or the SVR or MSS targeting not just government employees, but private sector employees in our societies. But we also see criminal groups seeking to do so for financial gain. It doesn't really matter which one it is. If you're trying to defend, it's coming through the same vector. One of the most striking cases on this public sector front that I can think of is the 2023 revelation of Chinese mass surveillance databases. In that case, researchers like you all uncovered billions of personal records, including facial recognition scans with biometrics, location data, private messages. And this one really frightens me because it demonstrates the Chinese Communist Party's true system of surveillance and control and how dedicated they are to aggregating any data they can. How they use it, we don't have to know. Do we need to defend our data? Absolutely. For national security agencies, this intelligence is really critical in understanding adversarial intent and capability. And for private enterprises, we increasingly need to educate them that the breach data does not die after the breach. And along that private sector line, I want to look at a few key ways breach data impacts businesses. I've been spending a lot of time thinking about kind of return on security investment because I've had so many meetings with financial services, chief security officers, CISOs, and SOC leaders and various teams. And they all say, well, we need X, but it costs Y. And I have to talk to somebody and explain to them the return on investment. And I'm not seeing a whole lot of business case studies on how you quantify that. But again, recommendations, not prescriptions here. Kind of got three buckets that I want to talk about. I want to talk about financial and operational damage. I want to talk about executive and employee risks. And then, really big one, I want to talk about brand and market trust. So, financial and operational damage. We know that a single breach can cost a company millions of dollars. Forget the ransom. Under things like GDPR and these evolving privacy frameworks, it can cost millions in fines, legal fees, and regulatory penalties. Bam, a quantifiable number. How much does it cost per record, per artifact lost? Do that math, show it to your decision maker. Downtime. The downtime caused by ransomware, info stealers, DDoS, et cetera, can really cripple critical operations. I think this industry has been aware of that for a long time, but that's another one that can be put into a quantitative bucket to explain the return. On the executive and employee risk front, I believe I mentioned the Rheinmetall CEO being targeted for assassination. There was the tragic murder of the United Healthcare CEO. In the wake of that, we have received so many inquiries about how to do executive protection that at Flashpoint, we've put out now a guide, you can find it on the website, for executive protection checklists for how to support OSINT for executive protection. And this is a really thorny one because I looked at some industry survey from one of the big threat intelligence, it was either Forrester or Gartner, forgive me, I don't remember which. But the overwhelming challenge addressed by physical security professionals in trying to protect their stakeholders was, how do we keep them out of the wrong place at the wrong time? The wrong place, wrong time problem is a wicked one. But OSINT can help with that through things like social media monitoring. Is somebody saying, hey, I hate person X? It can also be done with a geofence, right? We know they're going to this space this time. It could be time-bounded. We don't have to monitor that area forever. We only have so many resources, but we can look at this area for these 2 weeks. And so I think there's a physical risk, life and limb, and we know it. And it's not just the individual people, it's property, places where, say, a political demonstration has some agitators that then mention things about smashing glass or starting fires or how to prepare yourself for a violent riot kind of activity. We also see the exploitation of personal data for from breaches to inform subsequent really sophisticated social engineering campaigns. And then the big one, this is existential on the private sector side, would be brand and market trust. Because the fact is, and I think we all see it, the public does not only blame the hackers when there's a breach. They do blame companies that they feel failed to protect them. Companies that suffer repeated breaches absolutely face loss of customer trust, declining stock or enterprise value, and regulatory scrutiny. And so those are all things that can be at least roughly quantified. And if you talk, hey, we need to spend X tens of thousands of dollars, it might save lives. It might save massive insurance claims on property damage. And it might prevent fines of this order of magnitude because we do business internationally. So why do they need OSINT? Because the cyber threats are not operating in silos. And we need to have these private-public or public-private partnerships so that we can share information more readily across societies. NATO, through the Partnership for Peace Consortium, has put out 2 big reference curricula. One of them is on hybrid warfare and hybrid threats, totally Googleable. You can find it on the NATO website. And another one on resilience. The first time NATO has published documents for NATO members meant to target not only defense education and military intelligence type education, but also the commercial sector. And so we talk a lot about whole of society defense. And in this new hybrid Cold War, places like Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, they don't have a voluntary divide between their private sector and their government. We do. So back to my point that we need to step up and start defending our space and start reaching out. One of my favorite things I've observed in the past few years was I went to DEF CON after Black Hat. I've been going to DEF CON for years. DEF CON, usually more the Snowden crowd. Yay, all information deserves to be free, yay. Sorry, picking on Snowden. I think he's not a good person. But what amazed me was we're starting to see, literally the National Cyber Director, Chris Inglis, was at DEF CON, shaking hands with people I know who used to have very much a kill your government attitude. Because we're starting to see a threat. And nothing brings diverse people together more than a common threat. And I would argue those of us in this space are best positioned to talk about why the dynamic is changing. The world isn't what it was 10 years ago. So we do need to come together. And I mean it, I loved it. I was like, you, Chris Inglis, former NSA deputy director, you guys are taking selfies? This is great. And so, but in our societies in the free world, it has to be voluntary. It's not going to be compulsion. And so I think that that's really, if I have a lesson, that's what I want to preach. We got to think about our values and how we can come together. Those of you in this room, the thousands online, you all can start doing that now, because time really is of the essence. And the bottom line is that breach data is more than cybersecurity. It really is existential corporate risk and national security. So as information warfare escalates, our OSINT capabilities to collect, analyze, and allow our decision makers to act on OSINT becomes more important. I had written down here we're on the verge of a seismic shift. No. We're after the seismic shift, and we got to start running now. Anybody surf ever? No, not like on the internet, but like real surf. So one of the things I learned, and some old guy taught me how to surf when I was in the Marines in San Diego, and I didn't know this. You got to move your speed up to the speed of the wave, or the wave will top you up. So I would argue this: we got a big wave, we're already on it. Like, let's get our velocity up as a community, so that we can help protect our societies. I will talk a little bit now about some of these trends we're seeing threat actors use. AI, deepfakes. What's coming up ahead of us? Artificial intelligence absolutely do make OSINT faster, help make us more precise, and more scalable. We can analyze vast amounts of data in seconds instead of days, weeks, months, doing false positive, false negative evaluation. And we see machine learning help us detect patterns and anomalies, track disinformation campaigns once we've identified the source, and in many cases even work to help predict threat actor behavior, keeping us left of breach, left of boom. But on the other hand, there is a dark side on that. AI arms our adversaries with unprecedented capabilities. We're seeing it in the last 12 months. Deep fakes. AI-generated synthetic media has become so convincing. Look, I struggle. I'm not like an expert. They say experts struggle. I struggle. I listened to a podcast last week that was generated, complete transcript and the voices artificially, and I thought I was like, wow, this is awesome. When did you guys do this? And nope, it was AI generated. So that's going to be a challenge. And the scale at which the threat actor, whether it's a ransomware group or a state service, they can build that is, another example of that is Zelensky. So President Zelensky, about 3 weeks after the invasion started, some of you may remember he started live streaming from the street, and he said, we're not leaving. 3 weeks later, deep fakes of his video likeness, his voice likeness, started circulating saying, we are surrendering. OSINTers debunked that and got the word out fast. And you could imagine in those first 3 weeks post-invasion, that could have been the end of Ukraine, could have caused serious battlefield losses if that had gotten out the word to volunteer groups or international volunteers. Hey, and they all start running back. The scale and the risk of small groups leveraging these tools to create massive impact is very real. AI-generated phishing scams. I'm sure some of you have bumped into some of these. They're getting better and better. Writing scripts. It used to be I get a phone call from the car warranty people, right? Or I got approved for a business loan. We saw you have an LLC from 15 years ago that's defunct. Okay, yeah, I do. But I don't have a business loan. I don't have a commercial line of credit. But I absolutely, if I did, might have been tricked into having a conversation about interest rates that then led to my conversation about bank account and routing numbers, right? But the scripts are now written so a farm of human beings, some sheltered place, be it in Belarus, North Africa, where have you, can become very sophisticated in the point of even having that AI deepfake informed conversation in real time. I kind of think like Jerky Boys. Am I too old? Nobody remembers the Jerky Boys? Okay, yeah, so it's like a Jerky Boys script. Like, they don't even have to know what Jerky Boys are, they just hit the button and the Jerky Boys, talk about sizzle chest, whatever they do. So, yeah. We've seen it. You've all seen it. Tens of millions in transfers going out because a fake CEO called up a treasurer. That money doesn't come back. It's gone. And the weaponization of information. So we see the ability to automate, outsource disinformation at scales. We can't imagine. You don't need a farm of human beings doing fake comments on X, Twitter. OSINT guy, where are you at? Twitter, X, what have you, right? That can be AI generated at tremendous scale. You can build entire personas, armies of personas on these platforms. And that is going to be a problem. I don't pretend to have the answer. What does that mean for us? This next era of open source intelligence is not just about the collection. It's not, hey, I subscribe to this service, I have this data. It's about validating it and making it actionable for the decision maker in an ever-tightening cycle. We talk about living in the loop. We want to empower, at Flashpoint, we want to empower our customers to live in the loop so that their security professional doesn't just consume the data, they can do managed attribution, they can get collection, they can get upstream, use their observation in conjunction with publicly available and commercially available information. I'm going to argue that it's living on the loop, right? There is a place for the human being as we leverage these AI ML tools, and we have to do it because the human being needs to assess context, intent, and credibility, right? So think of it, we're not living in the loop, we'd slow things down, but living on the loop, checking the work, providing that validation, digging deeper. So it's a balance between automation and human expertise. I've got a son who's 19. I keep telling him, take any class you can on AI prompts, how to leverage AI, use these tools, and I would encourage all of us. It's like email in 1998. I don't want to use that stuff. How's it gonna matter to me? When will I ever use that in my life? And yep, it changed pretty quick. It went from me logging in on the DOS machine in the basement of Colorado College, right, to now I have my entire work schedule, life, communications in my phone. Some of you probably wear an Apple Watch. I don't. It's just too much data. It frightens me. Am I paranoid? No, not paranoid. Okay, there you go. So yeah, we're entering this realm where truth itself is a contested domain. And I'm going to pause there because that's a hard, wicked problem. And I'm going to argue that what really will define in this new hybrid Cold War how we perform as free societies is what are our values? What are our collective guiding ethics? How do we see more collaboration like the DEF CON guys connecting with Chris Inglis voluntarily? How do we see more private sector companies leveraging these OSINT skills? Perhaps OSINTers will never enter that kind of very small bucket of intelligence community professional that's doing cool hybrid work with the CIA and the NSA and the Joint Special Operations Command. And that's fine. But to defend our whole society, everybody has to up their game. We've got to start paddling super hard to catch that wave so that we surf it rather than get wrecked by it. So I hope that, in my brief talk, I got 1 minute left. I hope you feel that we did explore the critical role I believe OSINT plays in today's intelligence landscape, covering its impact on national security, cybersecurity, and importantly, corporate risk, and how we need to professionalize. Because the fact is, intelligence without informing action is just noise. It's another alert in the SOC. It creates fatigue. Too often, OSINT gets treated as passive information, just a feed. It's not a tool, it's not a solution, it's not informing the decision maker. We got to change that fast. And that's where you all come in, is hashtag it, ProSint, hashtag OSINT Summit, right? But that concept comes in so that we can provide verified, auditable, decision-ready intelligence and move away from the idea that OSINT is just open source research. Got to fight confirmation bias. Don't be one of the folks that's just, hey, I'm Control-C, Control-V. I found this thing, I pasted it, I did my job. Sorry, Apple users, what is it, Option-C, Option-V? Yeah. So, no, that's not the answer. That's just repetition. Maybe we're spreading confirmation bias if we do that, right? So let's get smarter and inform our decision makers, our key customers, how to be smarter, faster, and more decisive. Our adversaries are evolving. It really is time that we become new Cold Warriors collectively. The stakes are just too high. Thank you very much. I'm here all 2 days. I'd love to connect with people. Matt, thank you. I don't know if I gave a good pregame speech or if I was Debbie Downer. Sorry. But really thank you. And I can't say enough good things about Science Institute and everything that you guys do. So thank you.